The hive lay under a sickly orange sky, the sun barely piercing the layers of smog that clung to its endless terraces. Within its bowels, the air reeked of oil, sweat, and ozone, a stench that had become the constant companion of the imperial citizens who toiled without pause. Servitors clanged through the manufactorum, their motion precise, soulless, driven by ancient cogitators that never rested. Yet amidst this mechanical heartbeat, a whisper slithered, a misaligned bolt, a forbidden prayer, a hesitation in the cadence of a factory foreman who should have been loyal. It was small, nearly invisible, yet potent, the first tremor of a fracture that could ripple through the entire hive. Brother Captain Lysandros of the Adeptus Custodes had long suspected that subtle betrayals festered beneath the surface. His golden gaze swept the corridors, observing each cogitation and gesture, as if the very motions of the workers could betray their hearts. Some were obvious, the ones who spoke too freely of the void, who lingered too long over forbidden texts, or allowed a data slate to wander from sanctioned channels. Others were ghosts, shadows hiding in the routine, their loyalty a carefully constructed mask. Lysandros knew instinctively that the Imperium's greatest threat was not the orc horde beyond the void, nor the sudden strike of the tyrannid swarm, but the seed of heresy taking root within the faithful. The first betrayal was never a shout. It was a glance, a hesitation, a momentary slip. A tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus had rerouted a cogitator to divert a small cache of promethium to hidden chambers beneath the hive. Perhaps he believed the act inconsequential, a minor deviation for a personal gain no one would notice. But the hive's walls were not silent. They remembered, and the Omnissiah's servants watched. It was not divine wrath yet, not the Emperor's judgment, but the machinery of the Imperium responded in kind. Other small anomalies followed. A misaligned servitor arm here, a faulty calibration there, subtle signs of sabotage that only the most vigilant would perceive. In the streets above, the citizens carried on unaware, though the air hummed with tension. Rumors of shortages and disappearances spread, whispered from mouth to mouth, with the instinctive fear of hive dwellers conditioned to obedience. No one questioned the source, for to question was dangerous. Suspicion alone could be interpreted as treachery, and so the betrayal blossomed quietly, a malignant root feeding on fear and ambition. Lysandros moved among them like a living shadow, cataloging each gesture, each whispered word, each stolen glance that betrayed the soul's deviation from the Emperor's light. Beneath the surface, a single thought began to crystallize among the traitors. The Imperium was vast, its gaze distant, its bureaucracy immense. There was opportunity in that immensity, room for cunning and concealment. And yet, the first betrayal always underestimated the weight of the machine. Hive walls might seem indifferent, data slates might wander unseen, and servitors might follow corrupted commands. But every anomaly left a trace, and every trace could be found. For betrayal is never an isolated act. It is a chain of fractures that spreads faster than the eye can follow. And so, in the shadowed corridors of the lower manufactorum, where the hiss of steam and the whir of cogitators formed an unceasing symphony, the first tremors of heresy whispered through the walls. Lysandros paused at a junction, his eyes lingering on a technician whose fingers hesitated over a calibrator. The technician's breath came in shallow, quickened bursts. He knew the custodian watched, though he dared not meet the golden gaze directly. Somewhere, deep in the hive, the first betrayal had taken root, innocent in appearance, monstrous in consequence, and it would grow until the cracks it formed could no longer be contained. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation. Every shadow became suspect, every silence a warning. In that moment, Lysandros felt the weight of millennia pressing against his shoulders. The knowledge that a single act, small and nearly forgotten, could bring the entire hive to ruin, could summon the Emperor's judgment in ways no mortal could withstand. The first betrayal was never glorious. It was subtle, unnoticed, a spark in the darkness that promised fire, and already the hive trembled, though none yet could name why. The tremor of disloyalty spread quietly through the hive like a contagion. In the endless corridors, where the hiss of pneumatic pistons merged with the groan of steel, subtle deviations multiplied. A Vox grill left unattended too long, allowing whispered words of blasphemy to escape into the labyrinthine ducts. A servitor rerouted without proper sanction, carrying instructions the Omnissiah never approved. Each act alone was insignificant, a mere shadow against the Empire's machinery. But together, they began to weave a tapestry of defiance. The hive itself seemed to shiver under their weight, as if the foundations of its countless terraces sensed the quiet rot threatening to spread from the underlevels to the very summit. Lysandros walked among the faithful, his golden armor gleaming even under the dim, soot-stained lamps. The citizens, their faces etched with the grime and despair of ceaseless labor, did not notice him. Few ever did, and fewer still survived the noticing. The custodian's presence was a paradox, both a comfort and a terror. He felt the currents of fear and ambition that ran beneath the surface of the hive's populace, noting those whose eyes lingered too long on forbidden texts, who whispered prayers not sanctioned by the ecclesiarchy. Each infraction, no matter how small, was a step toward the abyss. The first traitor was rarely a soldier, rarely a heretic, fully aware of the consequences of their actions. Often, it was a man or woman driven by need, curiosity, or desperation. A worker diverted a minute fraction of raw promethium to sell on the black market, thinking no one would notice. A junior tech priest experimented with a pattern of cogitator code that might improve efficiency but bypassed ritual authorization. Each act carried a thrill, the intoxicating belief that one could outsmart the endless machinery of the Imperium. And yet, the hive did not forgive ignorance. The custodians, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the security apparatus of the planetary governor, all were patient and unyielding. Every deviation left a trace, and every trace could be uncovered. In the dim light of a lower tier forge, a whisper of rumor reached the ears of the first conspirators. Words of rebellion from worlds beyond their own, stories of chaos, cults that struck quickly and disappeared into shadow. The seed of ambition took root in these minds, mingling with their quiet crimes. They did not yet understand the nature of the Imperium's justice, how it unfolded with the precision of a grinding cog, nor did they perceive the inevitability of their own doom. In their naivete, the hive seemed vast, the emperor distant, and the consequences abstract. But the custodian knew differently. Lysandros traced the path of these small infractions, following the chain from misaligned servitor to falsified cogitator, reading to whispered prayer of defiance. Each act compounded the last, a spiral that fed on fear, necessity, and hubris. He understood the psychology of betrayal. The first transgression is rarely about power. It is about survival, curiosity, or small desire, and yet it carries within it the potential to shatter worlds. The lower hive was a crucible, and those who trespassed within it did so at their peril. The smell of burning promethium hung in the air, thick and choking, as alarms sounded in distant corridors. Lysandros did not flinch. He had witnessed such disturbances countless times, each a test of patience, each a whisper of what was to come. Somewhere deep in the manufactorum, a cogitator sparked under unauthorized hands, a blaze of heat and light marking the first unmistakable act of sabotage. The fire was small, easily contained, yet its significance was immeasurable. This was the moment when subtlety turned into action, when hesitation became choice. From the upper tiers of the hive, the citizens would have noticed nothing, and yet the implications reached far beyond the forge. Every whispered deviation, every misdirected cog, every momentary lapse in duty contributed to the first betrayal. A betrayal not of bloodshed or conquest, but of the emperor's will. And Lysandros, silent sentinel of the hive, understood that this single act would be the thread that, if pulled, could unravel the fabric of loyalty and obedience. The first betrayal had begun, quiet as a shadow, inevitable as the setting of a dying sun. It would grow, feeding on small acts, until the Imperium could no longer ignore its presence. And in the still, burning heart of the manufactorum, the custodian waited, patient and unyielding, as the spark of heresy promised to ignite a conflagration far greater than any mortal hand could contain. The sparks of rebellion, so minute in their inception, began to illuminate corners of the hive that had been deemed safe. Hidden chambers and maintenance tunnels, long forgotten by the planetary governor and rarely traversed by Adeptus Mechanicus auditors, became the breeding grounds for whispered treachery. The first traitors did not gather openly. They did not march under banners of defiance. They moved in silence, exchanging fleeting glances, coded gestures, and whispered data slate messages that the untrained eye could not decipher. And yet, in their caution, they underestimated the gaze of those who served the emperor's will, ever watchful, never resting. Lysandros lingered above a maintenance shaft, his armor a beacon of immutable vigilance. He observed the faint glimmer of unauthorized lumens from a hidden doorway, the subtle misalignment of a servo grip securing a panel in the tunnel below. These details were minute, almost meaningless to the average citizen, yet to him they spelled a warning written in a language older than the hive itself. He had learned that betrayal is rarely loud. It is a tremor, a stutter in the machinery of obedience, an imperceptible deviation that widens into catastrophe if left unchecked. The traitors, unaware of their surveillance, moved with cautious confidence. A young tech priest named Vareth had begun experimenting with unapproved cogitator sequences, believing that the mechanical gods themselves might grant him favor if his calculations succeeded. Another worker, a woman named Solara, diverted small amounts of promethium into hidden drums beneath her forge, believing she could use it to barter for medicines her family could not otherwise afford. Their actions were motivated not by ambition for power, but by desire, necessity, and pride. And yet, in the Imperium, no deviation is trivial. Rumors, like tendrils of smoke, began to permeate the hive, whispers of forbidden texts circulating among acolytes of the Mechanicus, unofficial prayers muttered to gods outside the emperor's light, servitors operating on altered commands. Each rumor, small and incomplete, added weight to the inevitable truth. The hive was fracturing, subtly, imperceptibly, yet inexorably. Fear and suspicion grew alongside ambition, feeding on each other, until the first betrayal was no longer a single act, but a network of choices, each one reinforcing the next. Lysandros descended the shadowed stairwell, silent as the void between stars. His senses were attuned to every vibration, every stutter of servo motors, every breath out of sync with the rhythm of obedience. The custodian had learned that the first betrayal is not a moment, it is a process, a slow erosion of loyalty that leaves only the illusion of stability. In the forge below, Vareth's cogitator sparked faintly, the hum of illicit calculations blending with the constant symphony of the manufactorum. Solara's hidden drums thudded against the cold stone floor as she moved them in the darkness. The hive itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of the coming storm, yet powerless to prevent it. Then came the first casualty of attention. One of Vareth's sequences overloaded a secondary relay, causing a small explosion that sent fire and smoke curling through the lower tiers. No life was lost, but the alarm echoed, resonating through metal corridors with an authority that could not be ignored. Lysandros watched from the shadows, noting the reactions: panic, confusion, quick improvisations. Each act, each response, became a thread in the web of consequence. The first betrayal had revealed itself openly, and the custodian knew that the cycle of detection and punishment would begin immediately. And yet, even as the alarms faded and order was superficially restored, the true weight of the betrayal remained. It was not the fire, the sparks, or even the minor damage that mattered. It was the awareness that the machinery of the Imperium could be bent, misdirected, and manipulated. It was the knowledge that a spark of desire, a hesitation, a momentary lapse could grow into a conflagration that might consume more than a single hive. Lysandros, golden armor gleaming in the lingering smoke, understood that the first betrayal was never merely about loss. It was about the fracture of trust, the erosion of order, and the awakening of ambition where none should exist. The hive exhaled, the smoke curling into shadowed corners, as silence reclaimed the manufactorum. Yet beneath that quiet, a seed had been sown, small, subtle, almost invisible, but it would grow, and Lysandros, ever watchful, would follow it to its end, for the first betrayal is only the beginning, and the Emperor's gaze is patient, eternal, and merciless. The hive no longer felt safe. The first tremors of betrayal had rippled outward, unseen yet undeniable, and the shadows themselves seemed to thrum with latent danger. Above, the spires and terraces of the hive teetered in a haze of smog and ash, their enormity dwarfing the citizens below. The streets carried the constant hum of labor, but beneath the rhythm of routine, fear had taken root. People whispered in corners, eyes darting to unseen corners, ears straining for the faintest hint of disloyalty. Even the air seemed heavier, as though it remembered the sparks that had ignited the manufactorum days before. Lysandros moved through this breathing city like a sentinel cast in gold. His presence went unnoticed, yet his perception touched everything. The subtle hesitation of a ganger passing a dead drop, the micro expressions of servitors whose programming had been corrupted, the misalignment of a cogitator sequence that had already caused irreparable waste of promethium. The first betrayal was over, yet it had left its mark, a network of quiet, imperceptible fractures, now feeding off one another, growing stronger with every passing hour. Each fragment of subversion was a whisper, a shadow that might become a blade if nurtured. In the twisting alleys of the lower hive, the traitors themselves were emboldened. They no longer acted out of necessity alone. Ambition had begun to mingle with fear, a subtle intoxication that lent them daring. Varith and Solara, the two central figures of the initial unrest, began to coordinate in ways that skirted detection. They left messages in hidden compartments, rerouted small cargoes, and experimented with unauthorized cogitator instructions. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, reinforced the idea that the Imperium could be bent, if only ever so slightly. And yet, in their confidence, they failed to see the custodian's golden gaze sweeping silently over every corridor. Rumor, the most dangerous weapon of all, began to take shape. Stories of shadowed figures in the manufactorum reached the ears of those who would never have questioned the Emperor's will before. Tales of forbidden alliances, strange rites conducted in unlit maintenance shafts, and whispered prayers to entities beyond the throne spread like a noxious wind. Citizens, terrified yet curious, began to notice irregularities they had ignored before. A cogitator sequence out of place, a servitor responding late to commands, a worker disappearing for hours without explanation. Fear and fascination intertwined, creating fertile ground for more treachery to take root. Above them, in the upper tiers, where the imperial bureaucracy churned like an endless river, whispers traveled more carefully. Administrators noted discrepancies in reports, minor deviations in shipment logs, and unexplained shortages of critical materials. These anomalies were dismissed at first as clerical error, a momentary lapse in the vast machinery of the Imperium, yet patterns began to emerge. And where patterns emerge, Lysandros knew attention follows. The custodian moved unseen through corridors lined with statues of saints and heroes, tracing every subtle disruption, understanding that betrayal is not contained in a single act. It is a contagion, spreading silently until it cannot be ignored. In a shadowed vault beneath the manufactorum, Varith adjusted his cogitator sequence for the third time, his fingers trembling slightly as the complex algorithms rearranged the flow of power to an unauthorized conduit. Solara waited nearby, her breath shallow, as she checked the hidden drums of promethium for any sign of inspection. Each act was measured, cautious, deliberate, but audacity has a way of growing with success. The first tremors of betrayal had emboldened them, and now their confidence allowed them to reach further, testing the limits of secrecy and control. The custodian lingered, unseen, but all-seeing, aware of every heartbeat and mechanical pulse in that dim vault. He understood that the shadow of the traitor is not merely the act itself, but the consequences it inspires. Mistrust among loyal workers, hesitation in obedience, and the slow corrosion of faith. The Imperium may seem vast, its gaze distant, but no shadow is too small to escape notice, and no act of defiance goes unrecorded in the eternal memory of vigilance. From the forge floors above to the labyrinthine tunnels below, the hive throbbed with a new tension. The first betrayal had lit the spark. Now the shadows moved in response, and as Lysandros observed, patient and silent, he knew that these shadows were only the beginning, the prelude to a reckoning that would test the faith, loyalty, and courage of every soul who walked beneath the Emperor's eternal light. The shadows grew longer as night fell over the hive, though the concept of night was meaningless in a world lit by the unceasing glow of industrial furnaces and the flicker of warning lamps. The alleys and maintenance shafts became corridors of suspense, each echo of a footstep a potential herald of discovery. The traders moved cautiously, their confidence bolstered by the apparent indifference of the hive's upper tiers. Yet the custodian's vigilance was unbroken. Lysandros traced their movements invisibly, understanding that the true threat of betrayal was not in open conflict, but in the subtle, creeping subversion of the Imperium's machinery. Vareth's cogitator hummed with illicit calculations, a low resonance that vibrated through the metal floor like a heartbeat. He had begun altering the flow of data across the manufactorum, creating minor anomalies in production quotas that would ripple upward through the chain of command. To him, it was clever, elegant, a small assertion of control in a galaxy that demanded blind obedience. Solara watched, her hands never still, moving drums and adjusting valves with the precision of someone who understood the deadly stakes. Each act of defiance carried an exhilaration that was almost intoxicating, the dangerous allure of bending the machine without breaking it, or so they believed. Rumor and reality began to merge in the minds of those observing the hive. Whispers of disloyalty grew louder, bolstered by a collective paranoia that spread among the citizens and lower-ranking operatives. Workers avoided certain corridors, glancing over their shoulders as if unseen eyes were always watching. Servitors, programmed with loyalty, yet susceptible to corrupted commands, began to behave unpredictably, creating opportunities for further exploitation. The shadows of the traitors were no longer just their own. They spread contagiously, affecting the rhythm of the entire hive. Lysandros descended a grated stairwell, his golden armor absorbing the dim light of industrial lumens. He paused to examine a cluster of unauthorized data slate transmissions, their content fragmented but unmistakably heretical. Each line of code, each misrouted command, was a mark of defiance, a thread in a web that could ensnare the unwary. He understood that the Imperium's response would not be immediate. It never is. Justice, like a finely tuned cog, moves deliberately, inexorably. But when it strikes, it does so with perfect precision. The shadow of the traitor was growing, but it had not yet been caught, and in that space between concealment and discovery, the hive was vulnerable. In the dim vaults below, Vareth and Solara whispered over their plans. The first spark of rebellion had emboldened them, teaching them that small acts of deviation could exist beneath the gaze of vigilance. They spoke not of conquest or glory, but of survival and influence, of the thrill of autonomy in a world where obedience is demanded and independence punished. Yet, with each calculated move, the custodian observed, tracing the origin of every act with a patience born of millennia. He knew that shadows thrive in darkness, but darkness is never absolute, and the Emperor's light, though hidden, is eternal. The tension was palpable. Every sound, the hiss of steam, the clatter of a servitor, the faint vibration of machinery, became a warning of possible exposure. Citizens moved with a heightened awareness, sensing the undercurrents of betrayal without knowing their source. Loyalty wavered silently in the minds of those who witnessed the anomalies, but dared not speak. Each shadow of treachery cast another, and the custodian's gaze passed over them all, an unseen arbiter of fate. Above the manufactorum, the upper tiers of the hive continued their mechanical rhythm, unaware that beneath them the foundations were subtly shifting. The shadow of the traitor is not measured in immediate carnage, but in the corrosion of trust, the alteration of routine, and the growing belief among the unfaithful that the Imperium's gaze can be evaded. Lysandros moved like a ghost among these living gears, marking every hesitation, every misalignment, every whisper of defiance. The first betrayal had begun to propagate, and the web of treachery was only starting to take shape. The hive breathed uneasily, a living organism sensing the infection within. Shadows stretched, intertwined, and multiplied. The custodian knew that the moment of reckoning was approaching, inevitable, precise, and merciless. But until then, the traitors walked among the faithful, believing themselves unseen, while the Emperor's will carried through millennia of vigilance, and the golden eyes of his custodians waited for the moment when subtle defiance would demand absolute consequence. The web of deceit thickened with each passing cycle of the hive's ceaseless labor. Every corridor, every maintenance tunnel became a stage for clandestine exchanges, unobserved deviations, and coded instructions. Vareth's cogitator hummed with subtle irregularities, a pulse beneath the constant machinery of obedience, while Solara moved her hidden drums with the meticulous care of a thief who understood the stakes but underestimated the reach of vigilant eyes. Their confidence had grown with success, yet every act of defiance left an imprint, a spectral signature that Lysandros traced invisibly, noting every fluctuation in the rhythm of the hive. The citizens, unaware of the custodian's silent observation, began to notice things they could not name. Servitors malfunctioned in ways that seemed coincidental at first, but hinted at a deeper manipulation. Orders from supervisors arrived, altered or delayed, prompting confusion and minor conflict. Rumors crept along the hive's arteries, whispered from one mouth to another, tales of shadowed figures, of prayers not sanctioned by the ecclesiarchy, of forbidden alterations to sacred machinery. Fear took root in these whispers, intertwining with fascination, creating fertile soil for further subversion. The shadows were no longer just the traitors themselves. They were an ecosystem of unease that spread through the hive with the inevitability of time. Lysandros moved closer to the source, descending into a lower tier forge where the flicker of illicit lumens marked the clandestine work of the first conspirators. He observed Vareth's fingers hovering over the cogitator controls, adjusting sequences with precision born of obsession. Solara's hands were steady as she verified the integrity of her hidden Prometheum reserves. Both believed themselves masters of secrecy, yet the custodian's presence was as certain as the Emperor's light, even if it remained unseen. He did not intervene. Not yet, for the first stage of betrayal is often most instructive when allowed to reveal its scope and depth. The machinery of the manufactorum groaned and hissed around them, its rhythm now a metronome for the unfolding treachery. Small sparks of error and misalignment, unnoticed by all but Lysandros, multiplied in significance. Each deviation was a testament to human ambition and weakness, a reminder that the Imperium's greatest threat is rarely alien or external, but internal. The slow erosion of faith, loyalty, and obedience. Shadows within the hive reflected the fragile confidence of those who dared defy, and the custodian catalogued them all. Understanding that betrayal is not merely a moment of transgression, but a process that corrupts quietly, persistently, and inevitably, the whispers of rumor intensified. Workers avoided certain corridors, glancing nervously over their shoulders. The occasional disappearance of a citizen for unexplained periods became fodder for speculation. Even loyal operatives, uncertain and fearful, began to hesitate, their obedience faltering in subtle ways. Each faltering moment added weight to the growing shadow of treachery. Lysandros knew that the hive's pulse had changed, a tension now threaded through every corner, every level, every tier. The first betrayal had given birth to its progeny, suspicion, fear, and doubt, feeding the ambitions of the unfaithful. Vareth paused at the glow of the cogitator, sensing something unnameable, a vibration beneath the machinery of reality. Solara, too, felt the unease in the air, though neither understood its source. The custodian, however, perceived it clearly. The Emperor's vigilance extended beyond physical form, carried through the devotion of his servants and the unbroken rituals of the Mechanicus. Shadows may move unnoticed for a time, but the light of scrutiny, though patient and unseen, is eternal. The first betrayal had evolved into a network, and every note of defiance was a signal to those who watched unseen. In the upper levels of the hive, supervisors and overseers noticed minor inefficiencies that could not be explained away. Shipments delayed, production quotas miscalculated, servitor maintenance logs irregular. These were small signs, but together they formed a pattern that suggested more than mere incompetence. The custodian had observed countless such beginnings over centuries, each one a lesson in human weakness and the inevitability of consequence. Shadows may dance, but they always fall under the scrutiny of the vigilant. The night pressed down, heavy and oppressive, yet alive with movement beneath the dim industrial glow. Lysandros remained still, patient, unmoving, cataloging every deviation, every breath of fear, every spark of ambition. The shadow of the traitor stretched through the hive, subtle yet potent, waiting for the moment when the first fracture would demand its reckoning. And in that waiting, the custodian understood a truth as ancient as Terra itself. Betrayal is never solitary, never fleeting, and never without consequence.